Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Chip. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. I think Texas Longhorns football fans are doing great because this miracle off season following a 5-7 football season with the longest losing streak since 1956 continues. Everything, it seems, has gone right for Texas. And on signing day part 2 on Wednesday, Texas lands the nation's top ranked offensive lineman, Devin Campbell. Top ranked according to the 24/7 Sports composite ranking, mind you.
The only rankings you should be paying
The
attention
only
to
ranking
on
that you should be paying
this.
attention to. And so Texas ends up with 7 stud offensive linemen, including both the nation's top interior lineman and top-rated offensive lineman Devin Campbell, and top-rated offensive tackle in Kelvin Banks. Not to mention 4 stars, Cole Hudson, Malik Agbo, Nato Uziumulu, and then Cameron Williams, the monster, 6'7", 360 with arms that NFL teams are already salivating over. And Connor Robertson, kind of the sleeper in the group, who, if you've been a loyal listener of the Flagship podcast or watch us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, Todd Dodge said on our Flagship podcast, he said a lot of things that people ended up running with, and it went viral, including his comments about Quinn Ewers and Texas fans' expectations. But he said that Connor Robertson is the kind of blood and guts warrior that kind of reminds you of a Casey Studdard type, a guy who knows the difference between pain and injury, and will do anything for his teammates. So I'm excited to cover these guys. I'm excited to watch these guys grow, Taylor. I think, obviously you're going to look at this 2022 class and you're going to say Quinn Ewers, and
Right.
it starts there. If Quinn Ewers is everything that his recruiting ranking says he is, and he's still got the mojo after not playing football for 2 football seasons, then this class kind of goes over the top. Quinn Ewers, they need him to be really, really good, and they need him to be really, really good as quickly as he can.
Right.
And that's it's going to start there, but the lines of scrimmage were addressed in this recruiting class.
Yeah, and that was definitely needed. Anybody with 2 eyes in their head would agree with that. Chip, it's really impressive to me that Kyle Flood was able to pull this offensive line class, not just because of the 5-7 season, and not just because there's questions surrounding Texas football, but just because the fact that Texas never has really signed these type of offensive line classes, at least that I can recall. In my time covering Texas, there's been plenty of top 10, signing classes that Texas has inked. And it's pretty much been consistently almost every single year since I've covered Texas. They've signed close to, if not, in a top 10 type of class. But there was always kind of the thought of where's the beef, where are the big bodies that you definitely need. And I know that with Texas going to the SEC and Oklahoma going to the SEC, that move pending, it's a different style of play. I think, you watch the national championship game and you see the bodies on the field and you're like, my gosh, Texas maybe has, 5 of people that look like that, And so I do think that the fact that Texas was able to sign that monstrous of an offensive line class when Texas really has not made that a huge priority, at least in recent history, that's big. And that's a position that Texas has been lacking a lot of elite talent. I mean, we go back and we've talked about this, time and again, Chip. You go back and look at just the last decade or a little bit longer than the last decade, the only 2 offensive linemen that Texas has put into the NFL draft were both really low rated 3-star prospects in Connor Williams and Sam Cosmi. So, the guys that they had previously signed that were the 4 stars and stuff hadn't really panned out, but you never really saw this amount of beef. I'll call it. You know what I mean? I mean that's really what it is. I mean, these are some big guys that Texas added, and that's a huge credit to Kyle Flood. I mean, if in my opinion, Chip, this is probably the best offensive line class, I would say probably in 20 years in just recruiting, not just at Texas, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's on paper. Now they need to develop these guys. We need the 4-star and 5-star players to play like that. We were first ones to report that Tyler Johnson, a former, 5-star, and when he finally signed a high 4-star, depending on, at what point in his high school career you want to look at, he's gone. He's gone from the program. And like you said, it was 3-stars like Connor Williams and Sam Cosmi who developed and ended up becoming NFL players. These guys got to develop, and then Texas needs to come back. Steve Sarkeesian saying on Wednesday that they need to take 4 to 5 offensive linemen every year, and they need to be guys who can push the guy in front of them and continue to have that kind of competition so that it's like planes on the runway. When one guy leaves, the next plane takes off, and it's seamless. That's obviously the way it's been at Alabama and at places like Ohio State and Clemson, where they've been contending for national championships on a regular basis. And Texas may not be done yet on the line of scrimmage, because I still think Texas is in a good position with TCU transfer portal candidate O'Shawn Mathis, who does not need to make a decision because he's still in school at TCU. He won't be done there until this spring semester is over. But I still think Texas is in a good position with O'Shawn Mathis. This is a guy with 15 and a half career sacks and has proven he can make plays on the field and get after the quarterback. And Taylor, I wrote about this in the Morning Brew this week when I talked about Caleb Williams deciding to go to USC. Texas's season turned upside down when Caleb Williams came into the Texas OU game.
Right.
He scored a 66-yard touchdown on 4th and 1. He threw a 14-yard touchdown on 3rd and 11 when the ball hit the ground when it was snapped to him. He had enough time to pick up the ball, set his feet, find his receiver, no pressure, and hit Marvin Mims for a touchdown. And he threw a 52-yard touchdown pass on 3rd and 19.
Right.
Like, you have to get to the quarterback. And in 3rd and long situations, there should be no chance to make those kinds of plays. And obviously Caleb Williams is not the Big 12's problem anymore, but what an example of where the whole season went wrong for Texas. It totally changed from 28-7 up in the first quarter to losing that game and then the 6-game losing streak because they couldn't get Caleb Williams on the ground.
Right.
And so, on this defensive line, you love guys like Justice Finkley and Jamon Tapp, young guys, Jare Bledsoe, but O'Shawn Mathis would be an unbelievable addition to this 2022 recruiting class, which is a top 5 class, but it's top 5 with line, the line of scrimmage addressed. And that's so huge because, like you said, anyone with 2 eyeballs could see that Texas has got to, like night and day, get better on both sides of the line. And this class gives them a chance to do it.
Yeah, it does. And, one thing I think that is very important when we are talking about this class is, not expecting these guys all to come in and be difference makers year one, because even Steve Sarkeesian yesterday during his, after Devin Campbell announced his commitment, had his National Signing Day press conference, and he said, he was directly asked about his thoughts on playing some young or true freshman offensive linemen. And he said, he's like, if you have, the possibility to, it's a lot harder, essentially, is what he said. It's harder to rely on a true freshman coming in at college. He's like, now, if these guys compete and they earn the playing time, then I have no problem playing a true freshman. But it's a lot more difficult for those type of guys to play as opposed to a skill player. And that's something that needs to be, put in the back of a lot of Texas fans' minds because we've talked time and again about that, the importance of having that redshirt year a lot of times for offensive lineman and quarterback. Those are two of the biggest positions that I think really benefit from having a redshirt type of season. However, if Texas continues to stack these type of offensive line and defensive line too, signing classes, that's how you build a championship program. That really is. And that's something that Texas has not been able to do. I think that this is a starting point for the offensive line, room trying to revamp it and, turn things around and change, recent history of how Texas has, kind of been a letdown on the offensive line side of, with that position and putting players into the NFL draft. I think this is a really good starting point, but, Texas definitely needs to expand on it, in classes moving forward and stack them up. However, I still think entering this season, the offensive line is still a little bit of a question mark right now, just because there's, a lot of unproven guys. There's guys that have playing time, obviously, on the roster. However, you can say we can judge it, based off of what we've seen. I'm not sure what the position is going to look like, but there's no doubt that this is a fantastic starting point for the future. And as you mentioned, the defensive line also. I mean, that's what was their total? I think what was it, 8 defensive linemen that they got?
Yeah,
Yeah,
8
yeah. So I
and
mean,
possibly, a chance to improve on that.
yeah,
And I think, you look at this, you say on the offensive line, you definitely need Andre Carrick to take the next step. We've heard a lot about him. The players like him. The players say he's nasty. You ask the defensive players who's the nastiest offensive lineman, they'll say Andre Carrick. Okay, Andre Carrick, come on down.
yeah,
This is the biggest offseason of your life. You need to be pushing. He needs to be the left tackle. He needs to beat out Christian Jones to become the left tackle. Because Christian Jones is so inconsistent. Now, look, he can take another step too, and they need him to,
yeah.
because you need to have 2 quality guys who, if one goes down, you don't miss a thing at left tackle. And then, Jake Majors at center, Junior Angalau at guard. You should be okay right there, but the other guard position is open. That needs, is it Hayden Connor? Is it Devin Campbell? Is it? I mean, look, the recruiting sheets say Calvin Banks is a tackle. If Calvin Banks has the best feet and the nastiest disposition, and he can figure out how to, tandem block and zone block and do all the things he needs to do, he can be the guard.
Mhm.
So you're right. There are some question marks, and that position needs to work together. None of these guys, except for Cole Hudson, are here for the spring. So a lot of stuff's going to have to happen, from June on, and it needs to. So this wonderful pot of ingredients are going to need time to cook, and they got to like each other. I mean, this is the thing. We talk about the 2002 recruiting class at Texas with Vince Young and Justin Blaylock and Casey Stutter, Lyle Senline, and all the talent in that class, the greatest recruiting class in Texas history. The reason it was so great is they all liked each other.
Right.
They thought the attitude in the program was too selfish when they got here. They saw Cedric Benson and Roy Williams, a Permian, Odessa Permian guy and a Midland Lee guy arguing on the field in the 2003 Holiday Bowl, and decided, we're getting rid of that stuff. We're together. It grew together, and that chemistry and all that was wonderful. These guys have to do that too. And in the age of NIL and all that stuff, that's even more of a challenge. At the end of the day, these guys have to come together, willing to do anything for each other. And that's going to take time. But a lot to be excited about in this class, obviously. And make sure you read Mike Roach and Nick Harris's behind the scenes part 1 and part 2 of how the recruiting cycle in 2022 went for Texas. because it's fascinating. And there's a lot of stuff in there about Quinn Ewers and all the, all the guys in this class, as well as guys Texas didn't get. Some maybe thankful that they didn't get, some maybe not, but it's a must read for the Horns 24/7 community. And if you're not a part of the Horns 24/7 community, come on. What are you waiting for? Get in. But Taylor, Steve Sarkeesian, I asked him, I said, okay, you say you got 33 newcomers. How many more can you take? And it sounds like 35 or 36.
Mhm.
Now, if O'Shawn Mathis says I'm in, he's in. And they're still looking for an inside linebacker, safety help, wide receiver help, but they're not just going to take anybody to fill those positions. They've got to be difference makers, and we'll see. We'll see. O'Shawn Mathis for sure is a difference maker at edge rusher, and that's another position. The positions they're looking at: safety, inside linebacker, receiver, and edge rusher.
Mhm.
If O'Shawn Mathis comes, the edge rusher thing is taken care of. But there's big question marks, as you and I have talked for weeks, about the safety position. I mean, Steve Sarkeesian, I asked him about the safety position on Wednesday, and he said the first two names out of his mouth were Jaron Thompson and Anthony Cook.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, "What?" It's a little surprising.
Yeah, Anthony Cook was one of the better players on the defense last year, and he played the nickel star position. And so now safety. And that means, okay, we got to find a new nickel star. Now, I like what Texas brought in this class at the corner position. I mean, Terrence Brooks, Ryan Watts, 6'2", almost 6'3", reminds people of Holton Hill
I
with
was gonna say that, yeah, the
his
bigger
length.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of, and I've talked to team sources who say, wow, the early enrollees at that defensive back position are impressive. Brian Allen, Larry Turner Gooden at safety. And you don't want, they need a field safety. They need a free safety to emerge. And maybe it's Brian Allen, maybe it's Larry Turner Gooden. I don't know, but they gotta find that guy.
Yeah, and the good thing, or I guess we can say the good thing when it comes to that is a lot of times, defensive backs are ones that can see the field earlier. They're um, the skill positions usually are some of those that do see the field a little bit earlier than say linemen. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's that the thing that's funny to me, Chip, is right now, like going into the quote unquote off season is when I think a lot of times football fans kind of check out a little bit because there's nothing going on. But the transfer portal and everything has totally changed that, and that's why you definitely want to stay over at Horns 24/7, because there's no denying that the recruiting is not done for this cycle. I mean, if Steve Sarkeesian is saying they could sign up to 36 people, they're at what, 32 right now. So that's a possibility of adding up to 4 more guys to this roster. So, there's definitely going to be a lot more coming out and a lot more coming after spring football as well. There's going to be a lot of players that from other programs after the spring is over that will enter the transfer portal, and that could open up a whole, new kind of open up a different Pandora's box a little bit of a possibility for Texas in the signing class. But yeah, there's no denying that safety is definitely a priority. I'm very interested to see what Brian Allen Jr. and Larry Turner Gooden bring to the table. In spring football, it's good that they're both early enrollees because I think Texas definitely needs it. But yeah, I think that this is definitely is not over, and I would say right now, the safety position and inside linebacker is definitely crucial. And those were two of the first ones out of Steve Sarkeesian's mouth when you asked him about players or numbers, I guess we should say, for the 2022 cycle.
Yeah. Interesting stuff from Steve Sarkeesian on Wednesday. He seems to be a lot happier. His
Yeah.
disposition is a lot better right now than we saw at the end of the well, not right at the end of the football season, because they did beat K-State to finish the football season, but you get the picture. I think when you look at the guys who are going, the 14 early enrollees and the team who are going through winter workouts, everyone wants to know what's going on with the quarterbacks. They are throwing, but I would say, look, they're going to look good. They're going to look pretty. Well, that's great. And the cool thing, and I think we've talked about it here, is that Quinn Ewers uh, seems to be, fitting in nicely with his teammates.
Yeah.
He's an enigma. We haven't seen him play in a couple years. He left early. Um, left his high school team at South Lake Carroll early to go get NIL money. That's not a good look from the outside. We don't know what's going on. Obviously, he's here now. This is the school. If you talk to people close to that situation, this is the school he always wanted to be at. And the bottom line is he's here now. And, I asked Steve Sarkeesian about Quinn Ewers, and he said, yeah, he's fitting in with his teammates. He's happy to be part of a team where he's excited to be there.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, he talked about him being in the dorms, and he gets the sense that Quinn Ewers kind of feels like he's one of the guys again, where that may not have been the case at Ohio State. So it was such a weird situation when he joined there.
right, he showed up. Fall camp was already underway. He hadn't gone through the summer to get to know his teammates at all, and took 2 snaps, 2 handoffs, and so that part of it, he and Hudson Card and now Malik Murphy, we've talked about that. The ankle injury that he suffered in that state championship game is going to keep him from being able to get to be a part of this winter conditioning, but he's around the team as well, and Charles Wright. So that's great. They're throwing. And Ben Ballard. I mean, we can't forget about Ben Ballard. I mean, Ben Ballard he was the 3rd string quarterback
He
at
was
the end
ahead
of
of
the
Charles Ray.
he was ahead of Charles Wright.
Yeah.
So we got to give the man his due, because he's, I'm hearing he's, doing some throwing sessions with these receivers, which leads us to Isaiah Neyor, Taylor. And I think that Isaiah Neyor is going to be an impact guy from the beginning, because from what I'm hearing, he is long. I mean, he's listed at 6'3". I'm hearing he's closer to 6'4". His arm length, his catch radius, this guy, and he can move. He's long, he's lean, and he can move. And I'm excited to see this guy. It's way too early to make bold, statements, but he caught 12 touchdowns last year. I just think this guy is going to be an impact guy, and that's exciting, because receiver was a huge question mark for this football team all year, because Jordan Whittington got hurt. Josh Moore ends up leaving the team. They've got to have guys who can take coverage away, or at least benefit from all the coverage that Xavier Worthy's going to get this season, now that he's a freshman All-American and had 12 touchdown catches. So I'm excited to see what Isaiah Neyor brings.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Chip, it is, you say like we'll see with him, but we have kind of already seen with him. It's a little bit different when we're talking about him, because, he comes in as a transfer from Wyoming, had that really big breakout season. And, that also, I feel like the addition of him plus Jaleel Billingsley, Steve Sarkeesian did talk about him also being someone who can kind of take some of the pressure, or be a player where the defense doesn't only hone in on Xavier Worthy type of thing. He's good enough to where they have to keep him, at bay a little bit too. But I think that the thing with Isaiah Neyor, he's proven himself, but now he also has a receivers coach that is, one of the up and coming, young type of coaches in college football, and Brennan Marion. Steve Sarkeesian talked at length about how impressed he is with Brennan Marion, and even with what he was able to do at Pitt, and watching the receivers at Pitt. Steve Sarkeesian talked about how they did something a little bit similar offensively with the receivers there that Sark wants to do with his offense. And so, I think that Brennan Marion coming in obviously was a really big hire, and I think a needed hire. I hate saying that because I always feel bad. I mean, Andre Coleman lost his job, so I feel bad saying like, oh, he needed to go or anything. But this is, I believe that this is an upgrade at the position from a coaching standpoint. And, in order for Brennan Marion to be what he can be, he needs the guys to coach and to develop. And I think that Isaiah Neyor is a prime example of somebody who could be that guy. And I think that the receiver room right now is in a much better position than it was at the end of last season. And I don't think it's too soon to say that. I really don't. I think that, it's easy to make bold predictions in the offseason, but when we're talking about guys that have already proven themselves at the college level, it's a lot easier to make those bold predictions. And I think that this group could look a lot different. And, also bringing back Jordan Whittington too. Sark did talk about that. Plus Troy O'Meary. I mean, we kind of forget about him a little bit, but he's, on the mend still, making his way back. Sark said that he is not, he's limited in winter conditioning or whatever. But I think that this group right now is in a much better position from as a whole. I would say from top to bottom, starting with Brendan Marion and trickling on down to the players there.
Well, and the thing I like about Brennan Thompson coming in from West Texas, small town kid, great nugget from Mike Roach in the behind the scenes recruiting part 1 and part 2 about Brennan Thompson having a conversation with Jordan Shipley, another small town kid, and how he was able to acclimate to Austin and Jordan Shipley, the all-time leading receptions career holder at Texas. So Brennan Thompson is a blazer. I mean, if you can complement Xavier Worthy and Isaiah Nayer's size and speed with flat out speed, and Bijan Robinson catching the football out of the backfield, Roshan Johnson, now the defense has problems. And so I like it. I like where this receiver room is coming together. They need more depth. They need a lot. They need Calvante Dixon to take the next step. What is Marcus Washington doing? They need to have the defense going a lot, and they haven't been going
Right.
And so let's see how much more they can add. And then tight end is still a question because you've got Jaleel Billingsley coming in from Alabama. Well, the reason he's leaving is because he didn't block the way that Nick Saban wanted him to block. He got passed over each of the last 2 years, including by a redshirt junior who, went on to set the record for touchdowns by a tight end this season at Alabama with 8 because he was a blocker and he could catch. So we got to see if Billingsley can take that step, or is it Gunnar Helm, who by all my team sources is the furthest along in the blocking game. And you got Jatavian Sanders, who's got the body to be the elite tight end. Now he's got to get used to all that get down and dirty contact and just be a monster, not just a guy who can catch the ball in space. Easier said than done. I got it. But you want to play in the league. I mean, the thing about Steve Sarkeesian's offense, it is a pro style offense. I mean, if you do what these coaches are asking you to do, you're going to get a look from the NFL. That's how respected Steve Sarkeesian, Kyle Flood, and this offense is. So buy in. I mean,
Right.
that's the bottom line.
Right. And Jeff Banks too. I mean,
Yep.
Jeff Banks is very highly regarded and respected in football, honestly. I think in every stage of football, every league of football. He has great relationships with the high school coaches. He's an elite, mind, and he's put a lot of players into the NFL. And he's the right guy for that tight end position too, Chip. I mean, that definitely does not hurt Texas in any way to have him. That was a guy that I think Tom Herman wanted to hire and couldn't, was unable to get him from Alabama. But I think, they definitely need to come along. No doubt about it at tight end. But I think that I would be less concerned about tight end if I were talking about the positions of concern right now. I would say that'd be at one of the bottom parts of my list personally.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
And
Famous last words, right?
well, and I had a conversation with a coach the other day, a coach not at Texas, and I was asking them who faced Texas, and I asked them about the defense and Texas's defense, and they were saying, well, you had Brendan Schooler back there who had been playing receiver, and then he flips back to safety where he played as a freshman at Oregon. and BJ Foster, who just signed with Sam Houston State.
Sam Houston State. Yep.
And the coach said, there you go. That's the story. That's all you need to know. I mean, he said elite defenses have guys who've been playing together in that secondary, so comfortable back there that they can see it all before it happens. And that just wasn't the case for Texas. And so we'll see if Jaron Thompson, Anthony Cook, and some of these young corners can push Deshaun Jameson and bring some of that security and that toughness to that secondary that was so sorely lacking last year, painfully lacking at times. There was good effort from some players, not so good of effort from others. Effort is non-negotiable.
Right.
That effort has to be on display at all times. So this is going to be fascinating. Of course, Gary Patterson is here now as a special assistant to Steve Sarkeesian. What did you make of Sark's comments about Patterson? Because this is really the first time Sark has talked about Patterson since the hire, and since the hire became official or whatever. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting to kind of hear a little bit more about what his role is. I mean, Steve Sarkeesian talked about with Gary Patterson, having another set of eyes that from a former head coach is exactly what Nick Saban has relied on at Alabama. It's how Steve Sarkeesian got the job at Alabama. He came in as an analyst, and that's something that Nick Saban is basically the fired Coach Factory to get them back into the coaching game there at Alabama. But I thought it was really intriguing to hear, kind of how Gary Patterson can also help with like Pete Kwiatkowski too. And it's not like a looking over your shoulder type of thing for Pete Kwiatkowski, Steve Sarkeesian. I'm very curious. I would say how close that relationship is, but Steve Sarkeesian did, I can only take him for what he's saying. He said that, Pete Kwiatkowski and Gary Patterson have really worked well together, and they have, a lot of experience. Patterson has a lot of experience in the Big 12, and that's something that can really help Pete Kwiatkowski, who hasn't had a lot of experience coaching against the type of offenses like he is at Texas. When he was in the Pac-12, he didn't face a lot of the type of offenses that he's going to be facing here in the Big 12. So, I mean, I would say what I made of it is it didn't really surprise me. I think the biggest takeaway was more kind of what his job is, and essentially what it is. It's literally Sark's right-hand guy. It sounds like a little bit, but more so than like a chief of staff type of thing. This is a right-hand guy that he can rely on from the coaching ranks. I mean, I wouldn't have expected a different answer. I guess I would say. What did you take from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve Sarkeesian mentioned that he was at the Senior Bowl on Tuesday, where he had a chance to see Josh Thompson and Cameron Dicker, and Gary Patterson was back in Austin overseeing the morning workouts, and it has been since he started on the job. He's been at those 6:30 a.m. workouts every morning, and I think as spring football progresses, I think Gary Patterson, because from what I'm told, Gary Patterson is going to speak when asked. Otherwise, he'll just observe and wait to
Yeah.
see if anyone wants his opinion on things. He's not going to be demonstrative, and he's going to be observing, and I think that's where Pete Kwiatkowski's comfortable, because PK is a quiet, really cerebral guy. I just want to know how they're going to tie the front and back of this defense together better than they did last year. And I don't know if it was all player buy-in. I mean, my God, I didn't see enough versatility. Um, I love PK's blitzes. I probably need to write about this, because when he brought pressure, it usually impacted the play.
Mhm.
And um, I I just think that Gary Patterson can really serve as and Patterson's background is in the secondary. I think he can serve as a really good sounding board to tie up that the cohesiveness of the defense.
Yeah.
So, and I do feel like they're strong at defensive tackle, Taylor. I mean, you know, I thought Tavondre Sweat was better as a sophomore than he was as a junior. Tavondre Sweat can play in the NFL if he'll get his body right and do, what he's asked to do. I love Byron Murphy. I mean, I think Byron Murphy is an NFL player, and so, and then they've got to figure out what they're doing with Alfred Collins. They've got to figure out a way to turn that guy into the monster he is, because he's too athletic, he's too big, he's too everything not to be an impact guy. He should be an all Big 12 player in 2022. They should put him in position, and he's got to do the things he needs to do. He's got to be better with his hands. He's got to stay lower, but they've got to put this guy in position to be a monster.
Yeah, and when you talk about the cohesiveness of the defense from last year, Chip, a part of me wonders how much of that was a lack of cohesiveness with the staff, because they'd never really coached together. It wasn't a normal type of situation where more times than not, when you hire a defensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator has a selection, at least, or an input of who he wants as assistant coaches on that side of the ball. Obviously, Pete Kwiatkowski was one of the last people that was hired on Steve Sarkeesian's staff. So, he didn't get to pick his own coaches. Now that they have a year working together, I wonder how much that also will help or play, a role in potentially improving the cohesiveness of the defense, because I feel like the staff may be a little bit more cohesive now that they've had some time together. And I don't know, that's to be determined, but one would think if this staff is gelling together, that should be the outcome. This season, kind of get those wrinkles out. But I think that there's no denying that Gary Patterson, his addition, it definitely does not hurt Texas in any way. I think that if anything, and one thing too, when you mentioned that Steve Sarkeesian being at the Senior Bowl and Gary Patterson being at workouts, Steve Sarkeesian is kind of a green head coach again. I mean, yes, he has been a head coach at prior parts of his career, but that was a while ago. And there's a lot more responsibility that falls on the head coach. Obviously, he knew that taking this job. However, I think that this could alleviate a lot of the responsibility and help Steve Sarkeesian kind of get more and more back into the flow of being, the CEO of a football program once again, but without the pressure of needing to do it immediately. You know what I mean? I feel like Gary Patterson can really help take some pressure off of his shoulders and take responsibility off of his plate, away from coaching players. Obviously, Gary Patterson can't do that, but I do think that his knowledge and his experience as a head coach could really help Steve Sarkeesian kind of get, back into a smooth flow of being a head football coach at a D1 program. Not saying, obviously, he already has 1 year at Texas. I know that, but still, I think that it's not a transition that happens overnight when you've had such a big, period where you were not a head coach. He wasn't even that Sark wasn't a head coach. He was an analyst for a number of those years. He wasn't coaching players at all, at Alabama for a couple of years there. So I think, I wonder if this will also help Sark in the long run kind of just get his feet wet and get back into the flow of being what it takes to be a head coach at a program as big as Texas.
Yeah, one of the funnier comments I thought that Sarkeesian made about Gary Patterson, he said people see him on the sideline, but he's a really good guy, meaning that. And it's funny because Patterson talks about the switch all the time. You got to have a switch as a player that you flip from being, Clark Kent and then turning into Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary Patterson will tell you, I have that switch too.
Yeah.
I'm the country singer, I'm the nice guy, but once step on that field, the switch is flipped, and even Gary Patterson turns into the Avenger, and
The Sweat and Gary's, as our guy,
yeah,
always I think, put it on our board last year.
he's getting a workout. He's getting a workout during those games. So, and Texas needs more, switch flipping.
Yeah.
And Taylor, that probably leads us right into Texas basketball, because, woo, I was in Lubbock on Tuesday night for that, and I've got to say, every single person in Lubbock had their switch flipped to 5 alarm fire, and they wanted to send a message to Chris Beard and all that hey, we're just fine without you. They played breakup songs, Taylor, throughout the game during the PA breaks.
Oh,
I mean, Kelly Clarkson's "Since You've Been Gone," the list goes on, and I mean, it was an unbelievable atmosphere. First and foremost, I gotta say, Chris Beard, job well done. You got that Raider Riot student following created over the previous 5 seasons. It is a monster, and it came back, and Chris got to see it firsthand from a view he probably never imagined. But that was relentless for 2 hours during the game. Forget that students were lined up and using F bombs every other moment when talking about Texas basketball for 4 straight days leading up to
ambushing the buses.
oh
Coming
my gosh. Buses. I mean, when the kids came out for warm-ups, F you, Texas, da, 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 da. It was nonstop. So kudos to Texas Tech. Kudos to Chris Beard for building that student following. Because the funny thing is, Taylor, the new coach at Texas Tech, Mark Adams, he's got the personality of a math teacher.
He looks like one too, kind of.
Super smart basketball guy, demanding, but he can't connect with students like Chris Beard with all that charisma and all that energy. So Chris Beard did him a huge solid by creating that home court advantage. And now Mark Adams, if he can recruit and continue to coach these players and keep that culture, he will continue to benefit from that home court advantage. But Texas Tech's a good team. We knew that. They were picked 4th in the Big 12 preseason, behind Kansas, Texas, Baylor. And they did what they were supposed to do. They defended their home floor. I thought Texas was rattled early.
Mhm.
Texas leading scorer, Timmy Allen, right when Texas cut it to 4, he turns it over. He misses a layup. Tech hits a 3, scores on a layup, goes back to 9, and Texas was never really in the game again. And in those moments, when you have a chance to close, you have a chance to shut that crowd down, you got to answer. And I thought Christian Bishop answered. I thought Trey Mitchell answered. Heck, I thought Devin Askew, Marcus Carr played their hearts out. Courtney Ramey. And really, those 5 guys I just mentioned, Taylor, I think are the backbone of this basketball team. And Timmy Allen obviously does it all and
Right.
needs to be a big part of it, and other players involved. But those 5 right there, Devin Askew, Carr, Ramey, Trey Mitchell, Christian Bishop, I thought those were the guys who were the toughest in that atmosphere and brought you the most. Brock Cunningham is a great energy guy, great defensive guy, gets your extra possessions with his offensive rebounding. I love him. He's Dennis Rodman. He's not going to score much, although he did hit his only 3 attempt in that game. But this is where Chris Beard has got to figure out who his last 4 minutes of the game guys are, and let's go, because Iowa State on Saturday at home, and then Kansas at home. You've got to defend your home floor, and Texas is still looking for a signature win.
Right.
I mean, they still don't have a quad 1 win or a top win over a top 10 team, or top 25 team, other than Tennessee, that the NCAA tournament committee is going to look at and say, oh, yeah, Texas. I mean, every time I look, Texas's seed is slipping. Now they're like on the 8-9 line.
Right.
So it's a critical point in the season for Texas.
Yeah, and it felt like, Chip, in that game, it just seemed like every time Texas did start to get a little bit of momentum, it was just like Texas Tech hit a 3 and just shut it down, and that was it was, an uphill battle from the jump. But yeah, I agree. I mean, now is the time. I mean, you can't let, this slip away. I mean, remember, Texas before the season was talked about being a Final Four team.
Right.
And it's like, obviously I feel like that was a little bit hyped, because Chris Beard, he had a wonderful offseason, obviously getting a lot of these transfers into Texas. So I think people hyped it up a little bit more than what they probably should have. But you don't want to go from being a potential, a Final Four projected team before the season to are they going to make the NCAA tournament? Like that would be a huge, huge fall from grace, and definitely not something that Texas I think can afford to do, honestly. Yeah, and this is a crucial time, Chip. This whole month, honestly, the month of February is a crucial month for Texas because they do face some of the best teams in the conference, and who are also some of the best teams in the country. Because the Big 12 is pretty loaded this year. From top to bottom, honestly, I feel like pretty much any team in the Big 12 can beat you, and that's not just saying beat Texas. I'm saying beat each other. Like I really do think that this league is pretty stacked from top to bottom. So yeah, there are some must win games coming up. And one thing just is totally random, I was talking to Bob Ballou from KI yesterday before Sark, and he was joking about how Texas Tech had Ric Flair be kind of their hype man at the game, and he's like, Texas should answer and have the Undertaker come. And I was like, oh yes, let's do that. I was
Yeah.
like, the Undertaker. Like I loved wrestling growing up. I was a big tomboy and absolutely loved the Undertaker. And he said that, and I was like, wait, let's really try to push this. Let's try to get this out
Yeah,
there.
think about it.
Yeah.
You could dim the lights, have smoke,
The
and then wheel
dum,
a coffin out,
yeah.
open it, have the Undertaker come out.
His
He
sing
didn't even have to say anything. The fans would be going nuts. He doesn't even have to say anything. That's what's so funny about the Undertaker.
Yep.
You've got Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, who could, rap with the best of them. Then you got the Undertaker, who never said a word.
Yep.
He just had the presence, and no doubt. I mean, the Undertaker is a huge Texas fan. He's around all the time.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean, honestly, the intro music that we use, our bed music for our podcast, when they put it together, my first thought, because it has kind of the bells a little bit. If you listen to the podcast,
Yep.
how it starts with it. Literally, when I got it sent to me, my first thought was, "Oh my gosh, this kind of reminds me of the Undertaker's walkout song." And I was like, "This is it, Bud. Let's go, let's go." Bud Elliott from 24/7. He's the one that got it together, and I was like, "I'm all on board, Chip. I don't even care if you don't like it because of
Yeah.
that."
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to some love it or leave it, huh?
Yep. Before we do get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because football talk and basketball talk actually will continue after the break. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. Chip, let's bring in some love it or leave it. You ready?
I'm ready.
Alrighty. My first one for you is love it or leave it. Other than Quinn Ewers, the 2022 recruit you are most excited about is Devin Campbell, the highest rated offensive lineman in the nation.
I am I'm excited about Devin Campbell. I am. Um, but you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna leave this and say the 2022 recruit I'm most excited about um, is freaking Cameron Williams, the monster. He's 6'7", he's 360 in his arms. He has like 37-inch arm length. I don't know if this guy's gonna ever be an impact guy or what, but man, I want him to be. I want him to be because that is what the NFL plays with. This guy, Jonathan Ogden with the Ravens, played at UCLA, was 6'9" and was eclipse of the sun big. But this is what you've been seeing at Alabama, and he's from Duncanville. I just get excited about seeing a guy at tackle with that frame, and because that's what you win with. You can hold off the Nick Bosa's of the world and the great pass rushers with that kind of frame. So if we're just talking pure excitement, then give me Cameron Williams.
Okay, I got you.
Taylor, how about you?
I I'm gonna leave this too, but I mean, since we're talking about if Quinn Ewers is in there, I assume that we're gonna also talk transfers in the group too. And so I would say that um, obviously I'm excited to see Devin Campbell, same with Kelvin Banks, all of these offensive linemen. Honestly, I'm very excited to see. But I would say of the 2022 signees, I am probably most excited to see what Isaiah Nayer, excuse me, can bring to the table. I really do think that, obviously he's proven himself at the FBS level. Um, a little bit different competition that he faced in Wyoming, but still, I think you can't overlook, more than 800 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. And I really think, him in a Steve Sarkeesian offense and, being coached by Brendan Marion, I really do think that he could even, improve his game substantially if he does, continue to develop the way that he was showing on the field, at least at Wyoming. So I would say I'm leaving in. I would say Isaiah Nayer is the one that I am most excited to see.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's gonna make a difference.
Yeah.
All right, love it or leave it. Number two.
All right. Number two, other than Quinn Ewers again, the 2022 recruit that you will have the biggest that you think will have the biggest impact immediately is receiver Isaiah Nayer. Love it or leave it.
I'm gonna love this because I in Steve Sarkeesian's offense, you put a 6'3", 6'4" receiver with length and speed. That guy's got a chance to make all kinds of plays because the best friend of a quarterback is a receiver he can just throw the ball up to.
Mhm.
Like, even if he's blanket covered by Jalen Ramsey, if he can go up higher than Jalen Ramsey and make the catch, and I got a quarterback who can throw it to him higher than the DB, oh yeah, then I'm in.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna love this. I agree with what you just said. I mean, from an excitement level, this guy's gonna provide excitement.
Right.
Um, he's an impact guy. He's shown it already, and I just think this is exactly what the Texas offense needed. Typically, you get speed in guys who are 6'1" or smaller.
Right.
Then you get the freaks like Calvin Johnson, the Megatrons, who are somehow Randy Moss, 6'5", and can burn. Um, so I'm excited. I'm not saying Isaiah Nayer is Randy Moss or, Calvin Johnson. He's just a big guy who can fly and he's got long arms, catch radius. So yeah, I'm going to love this because I do think in terms of impact on the offense that everyone's going to see, it's going to be very apparent because he's going to be catching passes that move the chains, score points. Isaiah Nayer probably is the biggest impact guy in this 2022 class. How about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to love it. And the other, for everything, I'm not going to repeat everything you said, but I agree with everything that you were just saying about him, what he brings to the table and, provides something that Texas didn't have, I think, for the last 2 years, honestly. I would say they lack that type of receiver. But the other thing, too, where I think he's going to make an impact is he's going to also, I think, impact Xavier Worthy's, his production as well, because this is another guy that defenses are going to have to, as Steve Sarkeesian said, like they can't just hone in on one guy if you have other receivers out there with, Xavier Worthy obviously being probably the bell cow, I would say, of the group. But then if Jordan Whittington's healthy and Isaiah Nayer is available on the field, those are three guys that you've got to look out for. Oh, and that's before we're talking about Bijan Robinson, who is arguably one of the best returning running backs in college football for 2022. So, yeah, I think that Isaiah Nayer from himself, he will make a huge impact, I believe, in 2022. But his presence on the field, I believe, will also impact other, skill positions on offense, which is not something that you should take lightly. And that's what Texas needs. They need multiple weapons that defenses have to be, account for, and not just a running back and a receiver. The more type of difference makers you put on the field, the harder it is on the defense. And so I think that Isaiah Nayer, for a multitude of reasons, I think he's going to not only have an impact as a player, in 2022, but his presence on the field is also going to impact a lot of the players on offense too.
Yeah, yeah, huge pickup.
Mhm.
for Texas in this in the transfer portal. All right, our last love it or leave it.
All right, my final one is love it or leave it. Texas' next two home games against Iowa State and Kansas are make or break games for the Longhorns' NCAA tournament resume.
I'm not going to say make or break. I'm going to leave this, but you have to win against Kansas, Texas Tech, and Baylor at home, and you're probably not going to win all those at home, but you got to get some quality wins, and you got to get momentum. You got 9 games left in the regular season before you go to the Big 12 tournament. The Big 12 tournament is your get out of jail free card. If you can become the hot team and win that thing, you're automatically into the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying Texas is, you know, I mean, they're not a bubble team yet, but they're getting there and they need to not be there. And so, I mean, I'm almost talking myself back into changing my mind and saying, yeah, these are must win games. Because Iowa State's, they're good, but they played out of their minds against Texas and Ames. So I would say that is a must win. And then Kansas, uh, Ogbaji is the leading scorer in the Big 12. He had COVID the other night. He didn't play. Kansas still won against Iowa State. I think, you know what? I'm still gonna leave this because if they beat Tech at home, if they beat Baylor at home, and they can beat Kansas at home, they're fine.
Mhm.
But you can't. I'm also thinking about the last home game they played. Well, I'm thinking about the Kansas State game where they were up, by 5 with a minute 28 left or whatever it was, and they get outscored 6-0 and lose. Um, so yeah, they got to get it going. I mean, they got to get it going, but it's not make or break. So I'm going to leave it. But man, they need to get some momentum going. And these next 2 games would be a great place to start.
Yeah,
How about
because
you?
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna agree. I'm not gonna say that it's make or break right now, but there's no denying that they definitely need to get some momentum because, you look at the schedule chip, we say, we're talking about, you know, um, home versus Iowa State, home versus Kansas, and then they go at Baylor, the number 8 team in the country. So they're facing the number 20 ranked team, the number 10 ranked team, and the number 8 ranked team in 3 straight games. So you definitely want to get some momentum, down the stretch here, and they definitely need it. I don't think that it's make or break right now. Um, I don't think it's going to be a situation like last year where Texas had to win the Big 12 tournament in order to basically get a bid to the NCAA tournament. I don't necessarily see that playing out at this point, but there's no denying that Texas is in desperate need of some momentum during this month because this is going to be a really tough stretch, leading up to that Big 12 tournament. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to leave it, but I do think that they have to win some of these games.
Yeah. And I'd like a lot of Devin Askew, Marcus Carr, Courtney Ramey, Christian Bishop, Trey Mitchell on the floor, please, with Andrew Jones coming in to give him some scoring, with Brock Cunningham coming in to heat him up, Timmy Allen. But I think after watching that atmosphere on Tuesday, and it took Timmy Allen way too long to engage the way that Christian Bishop and Trey Mitchell were going after those guys. I'm not trying to come down on Timmy Allen, but it's crunch time, and your best players got to show up in the big games. Texas Tech's 3 leading scorers all played great in that game, and I need to see that toughness. And I saw it in Christian Bishop. I saw it in Trey Mitchell. I saw it in Marcus Carr and Devin Askew. And Courtney Ramey's a sniper. Those are the guys I need to see on the floor a lot together. I'm
Yeah,
just saying. All
Christian,
right.
you're listening. Coaching tips
Listen,
from Chip Brown here.
we've got a lot going on. Next week we'll talk Texas baseball, baby, because
Woo.
we're closing in on Texas baseball opening the season February 18th against Rice, and their preseason ranked number 1. We'll get into it. We got all kinds of stuff going on, and it's always going on at horns247.com. If you're not a member, my gosh, join Horns 24/7 right now just to read the behind the scenes recruiting part 1 and part 2 on the 2022 class from Mike Roach and Nick Harris. It's fantastic. That's why you join Horns 24/7, to be an insider.
Exactly.
Come on. If you're not an insider, then you're outside. No one wants to be outside. It's cold right now. There's like a
There's
freeze going
snow
on.
outside my window right now.
Heck, drip your faucets, folks.
Yeah.
You don't want big problems. All right, Taylor, great stuff. Thanks everybody for listening to the Flagship podcast. Uh, until then, we'll see you over at horns247.com and on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. And stay safe and keep the faith.